Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Reserve Study Basics. This webinar is sponsored by Association Reserves, Inc. My name is Paige Daniels and I'm the Marketing Manager for Association Reserves. I'll be serving as your moderator for today. Reserve Study Basics is a 45-minute webinar designed to help you clear through the clutter and misinformation about reserve studies and help you get right to the important issues. Today we offer a presentation with no frills, no math, just a simple explanation of the things you need to know that will help you make informed decisions, not guesses, about important reserve study and reserve funding issues. Decisions about the reserve fund, reserve funding, and reserve components are some of the biggest decisions a board member makes, and the effects of those decisions often have legacies that last for years. It is important for board members and managers to have a firm grasp on the subject to prevent careless mistakes, deferred maintenance, and special assessments. I believe you'll find that 45 minutes today will have been a great investment of your time. Due to the number of people attending, everyone has been muted, but you can ask questions at any time by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. We'll start our Q&A time at the end with some questions that have already been emailed in. So type your questions and we'll get to as many as time allows. We'll be answering your questions during the last 5 to 10 minutes of the broadcast. Now, before I introduce our speaker, and while we're waiting for everyone to get logged in and settled, we'd like to get to know our audience a little better with 2 quick polls. The first poll being, have you attended one of our prior webinars? Please go ahead and select yes or no. Okay, Robert, it looks like we have quite a few newbies with us today, so welcome to everyone. And our second poll is, what is your role in the world of association governed communities? Please go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. A good mix with us today. Good portion of volunteer board members, though. Great, this is good information for everyone. I'm sure everyone will enjoy it. Now it's time to introduce our speaker. Robert Nordlund is the president of Association Reserves and a registered professional engineer. Robert is also a certified reserve specialist, was involved in creating national reserve study standards, and has greatly influenced this industry for the past 29 years. He regularly writes on the topic of reserve studies and speaks at industry functions throughout the nation. Association Reserves has prepared over 40,000 reserve studies for association-governed communities in all 50 states. Robert is often called to serve as an expert witness in litigation involving reserve issues. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Nordlund. Robert?
Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, everyone. As I think about it, what a treat it is to have the technology to share what we know about reserve studies to a nice-sized crowd from all across the country. The size of today's crowd and the reserve study proposal requests we continue to get from associations just finishing a painful special assessment make it clear to me the value of webinars just like this one. So if you're a board member, manager, or other industry professional, today's webinar will help you avoid financial problems and help you make wise, informed decisions about reserve studies and reserve funding. Today's session is designed to help you avoid guessing and drifting with respect to reserves. Guessing is no way to run a multi-million-dollar not-for-profit real estate corporation. Guessing about financial decisions as a manager or elected board member is fundamentally irresponsible and can actually get you into legal trouble. So this type of session is important because those questions of how much should we be contributing and do we have enough money in our reserve fund, what type of reserve study should we get, and how often should we update our reserve study? They all have answers. And today's session is designed to give you enough reserve study basics so you don't have to guess about what to do about reserves or reserve studies. It all boils down to being in a board meeting or budget meeting where you make decisions. A reserve study is going to save you time in those meetings, giving you the facts so you can make informed budget decisions based on evidence, not long discussions based on feelings. A reserve study saves you money by helping you be prepared to perform a reserve project on time, not after deferred maintenance makes that project more expensive. And a reserve study actually can help you make money by keeping up home values because of projects that are done on time and their influence on curb appeal. And finally, a reserve study minimizes your liability because it keeps you from guessing on important financial matters. What you'll learn in this presentation today is going to help you make informed choices at those board or budget meetings. So, today in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to take you from being unsure about basic reserve study issues to being confident so you can make informed decisions. And this applies to board members, managers, homeowners, and all the other industry professionals who've joined us today. As Paige indicated, I plan to give you simple truths and clear explanations and not get bogged down in math or details. We've done plenty of other webinars on those different detailed aspects of reserves that you'll find on our website, www.reservestudy.com, or on YouTube. After today's session, you'll have a general understanding about reserve studies, what they are, why they're created, and how they're an essential element for an association's financial success. As a reminder, this is a live presentation and everyone's been muted to keep the background noise to a minimum. I want to point out a few controls that appear on your screen. I like an interactive presentation, so every once in a while I'll ask for your feedback, and the way to respond is to raise your hand electronically by clicking the hands raised icon in your control panel that looks like the one you see on screen. And if you came with a question, or if at any time you have a question that arose due to something I've said, type it in the dialog box in your control panel, similar to the one that you see on screen. Paige is going to be monitoring your questions throughout the session today and select from those at the end during our Q&A session. And again, due to the number of people we have attending, there's more questions already than I know we can answer. And so if you answer the end of session questionnaire, you'll get the outline, and in that outline we'll have written answers to all the questions that have been submitted. Well, I hope you have a pad of paper and are taking notes, but just to give you some peace of mind, I want to let you know that the session today is being recorded. As I indicated, it's going to be uploaded to our website with all the other ones. So, are you ready? Without further delay, let's give it a test. Why don't you click your hands raised to show me you're ready for me to get going on the presentation. Hands raised, everyone? Nicely done. Okay, I'm going to click everyone's hands raised down and get on with the program. One of the main problems with reserves is that they're often perceived as complicated. On your screen, you'll see a typical chart of reserve expenses through the years. It's easy to see that in some years, reserve expenses are large, and in other years, the reserve expenses are very small or even zero. The expenses actually look pretty random here. So how are board members supposed to be able to budget responsibly and successfully with only a stable homeowner assessment income stream to work with when the expenses look so random? But here's the key. Those expenses aren't random at all. All those expenses come from the reserve component list, and I'll get to which components should appear on this list in just a few minutes. But for now, the point is that every reserve study has a reserve component list that looks something like this. A listing of each component's description, that project's useful life interval, which is how often the project recurs, the remaining useful life, which shows where it is in its useful life cycle, and the current replacement cost. You can see that the components listed here are stable, predictable expenses. The actual expenses that come from these may occur in scattered years, but all these stable components are currently deteriorating on a steady, ongoing basis. Those expenses are going to appear random, like we showed in the prior chart, but they occur on the basis of that very steady, predictable deterioration, which should bring us to our first aha moment. Steady expenses are easy to match with a homeowner association's steady and stable income stream. So let me take a quick break to ask a question. Are reserves for the here and now or the future? Paige, can I get you to launch a poll, please?
Of course. Here we go. Go ahead and make your selection. All right, great. Majority of people are saying for the future.
Got it. Okay, I'm glad they're with us today because reserve contributions offset steady, ongoing deterioration. The expenses happen at some point in time in the future when the component fails, but the cost of deterioration was ongoing. It's steadily happening over time. So reserve contributions are not for a guess about an expense that might happen 20 years into the future. Reserve contributions pay for the here and now, very predictable deterioration that happens on a daily, weekly, monthly basis over the life of the association. So if the association makes properly budgeted reserve contributions to handle that ongoing deterioration, frankly, the future will take care of itself. So before I start with specifics about reserve studies, it's important to let you know that all the points I'm making today are not just the way I see things or the way Association Reserves sees things. Ever since 1998, we've had National Reserve Study standards, and everything I speak about today is based on National Reserve Study standard principles. The terms I use, the calculations we make, the standard disclosures that are to appear in a reserve study, all those should be consistent across the country for all types of associations due to National Reserve Study standards. And that's a great thing. So, start with the basics. Why do we need a reserve study? Why not save all that planning effort and time and just deal with the major expenses as they occur? Well, outside of being terribly unfair to the unlucky owners who get stuck paying for the full price of whatever project occurs while they own a home in the association, isn't the future expense a future board member's problem? Well, I addressed part of that a moment ago because it's ongoing deterioration cost, but there's another side of it. There's another flaw to that thinking. Deterioration is ongoing. It doesn't stop when something is due to be repaired or replaced. Deterioration that's ignored doesn't go away. It just keeps on proceeding forward. Typically, minor deterioration turns into expensive major deterioration. For instance, look at this simple painting project that was deferred, and it turned into a big expensive carpentry project, about 7 times more expensive. The association hadn't prepared financially for the painting project through the years, and so when it came to do the painting project, it got delayed. This simple asphalt seal and repair project was deferred. The board's never quite getting around to it, and it turned into a big expensive resurface project, which is about 10 times the cost of a seal project. Deterioration can't be ignored. It quickly gets expensive. The same holds true for so many other reserve projects. Look at this ironwork. The board decided to save money on repainting it. They frankly told me that. And it turned into an expensive major ironwork replace project, about 8 times the cost of repainting. And this association was trying to ignore the advancing age of its roof, thinking they could squeeze a few more years of life out of it because they, again, weren't collecting enough funds for its replacement. And they were right. They can squeeze a few more years out of it, as long as they keep it covered by plastic tarps. But the money they thought they were saving, they spent all their savings and much more on expensive unit interior repairs because they failed in their responsibility to maintain the roof system. I could go on and on, but you get the point. Preparing in a timely manner saves everyone money. Delaying, waiting for the last minute, gets expensive. Okay, new subject. What choices are you typically faced with in commissioning a reserve study? And once you get it, what have you actually purchased? Fortunately, defined in National Reserve Study standards are 3 types of reserve studies, not a long or complicated list. One is a full reserve study, another is an update with site visit, and the third is an update no site visit. They're all pretty self-descriptive. The full reserve study is created from scratch. It's a full project. It's done when no reserve study exists, when all the assets need to be chosen, quantified, and evaluated. And again, created totally from scratch. An update with site visit involves revisiting an existing reserve study, updating it on the business or on the basis of a diligent visual site inspection. The update no site visit involves updating that existing reserve study on the basis of time that's elapsed since the last reserve study, refreshing and updating all the remaining useful life and cost factors based on interviews with association representatives and vendors. It's the least expensive of the professional reserve study levels of service. Because the typical association only performs a full reserve study once, most of the reserve studies an association will do, and most of the reserve studies we prepare, are either with site visit updates or no site visit updates. With site visit updates are typically accomplished every few years, and no site visit updates are typically done annually and in the years in between those with site visit updates. And that brings us to a nice stopping point here. Let's take a short break for questions. Paige, any questions at this point in time based on the material I've covered so far?
Yes, Robert. There is one question, and it is, how many components are in a typical component list?
Excellent. Right on point. The component list that I showed was, 5 or 10 components, a nice short list. That's just for the sample purposes here. The typical association that we deal with has a component list that's about 25 to 35 components. Not too long, not too short, and within that component list, there's typically 3, 4, 5 components that dominate the reserve project. So it's typically not a forest of information, not 100, although there are some associations that have that many discrete components. But typically, a component list is 25 to 35 components, somewhere in there. Anything else along those lines?
No, not at this time.
Okay, let's get back to the program. Let's talk about objectives. What are we trying to accomplish? I find it helps to know what we're trying to do and why to do it if you have a clear understanding of the end result that you're trying to achieve. Well, there's 2 primary objectives in the field of reserves. The first is that we're trying to help the association accomplish their major repair and replacement projects in a timely manner, which, as I mentioned a moment ago, offers significant cost savings. That means knowing in advance when those expenses are coming, so the association can prepare by interviewing vendors and getting bids, and they can become financially prepared, ready with the right amount of money to get the project done. And the second objective is so the board can spread out the contribution burden fairly and evenly over the owners, so every owner pays their fair share of ongoing deterioration on an ongoing basis over the time they own a home at the association. Another reserve study basic concept is what is in a reserve study. Well, like the types of reserve studies, there are 3 parts of a reserve study. Again, simple, not a long list. 3 parts, and they're all interrelated. The first is the reserve component list. I showed you a simple example just moments ago. This list defines what you're reserving for. It defines what you're trying to keep in good repair at the association with association funds. Thinking back to that slide I showed a bit earlier, the component list contains a description, an estimate of useful life, remaining useful life, and the current replacement cost. The second part of a reserve study is a calculation of reserve fund strength, measured in terms of percent funded. And this is where you get an answer to the question, at this time, do we have enough? And the third part of the reserve study is often the highlight of a reserve study, is what people go to first. It's a calculated multi-year reserve funding plan recommendation. It's the answer to the question, how much should we be setting aside at this time so we can accomplish those projects in a timely manner and offset ongoing deterioration? But let me illustrate this and bring you back to the major projects, the reserve components. They represent the foundation of these 3 elements because the reserve fund strength and reserve funding plan are calculated on the basis of the reserve component list. Now, do you see how they all come together? Give me a hands raised if you understand that associations with more deterioration, meaning low remaining useful life, are going to need more reserves on hand, and that more components or more expensive components are going to mean higher reserve contributions. 3 parts and all interrelated. Give me a hands raised if you can see the interrelated. There they go. I see hands raised up top to bottom on the list. Excellent. They're all with us. Okay, I just described the reserve component list as the foundation of the reserve study. It's important that all the right components, but let me say only the right components, be listed in the reserve component list. But which ones are the right ones and which ones aren't? Fortunately, we have stable guidance from National Reserve Study Standards. We get a 4-part test, which you see on your screen. If a component passes all 4 of these tests, it's appropriate to be funded through reserves. So starting at top left, it needs to be a common area maintenance responsibility. Then it needs to have a limited useful life with a predictable remaining useful life. And the 4th test is it needs to have a minimum threshold cost of significance, so above a minimum cost. And that often means somewhere in the range of 0.5% to 1% of the association's annual budget. So now you see this reserve component list in a slightly different light. All these components passed all 4 of the National Reserve Study Standards 4-part test. They're all common area maintenance responsibility, not private property, not management company property, not developer property. They are life limited, meaning not permanent. They have predictable remaining useful lives, meaning you can see where they are in the progression from new to old, and they're all significant to the association. They're all big enough that they can't be more effectively absorbed into the ongoing operational maintenance budget. The component list, another way we describe it is giving us the scope and schedule of the reserve expenses. The scope is which projects are going to happen and how much they're going to cost, whereas the schedule is when they're going to occur, both how often and when's the next time. Put all this information together, add an inflation factor, and you get the map of reserve expenses facing the association as showed earlier. These are the expenses that need to be funded with stable reserve contributions. So let's get to some numbers. Suppose you're in a budget meeting and you're wondering about your starting point. Let's talk about reserve fund strength. How do you know if your association is well prepared or not? Have past boards done a good job of collecting enough to offset ongoing deterioration, or have they left you holding the bag? If you're a current board member, how will your actions be measured? Are you going to leave the association in a better position than when you first became a board member? The question of reserve fund strength means, has the reserve cash balance, the contributions, has reserve cash balance kept pace with deterioration? Both are moving and changing. It's a comparison, and that comparison is called percent funded. It's the comparison of reserve cash to the current value of reserve component deterioration. When I became president of my association, which is how I got introduced to this field, it was a year of no reserve expenses. Treasurer reported that we had $9,000 in reserves, and that sounded like a lot because we didn't have any expenses. So we were actually thinking that maybe we could use some of those funds to cover some shortfalls in the operating fund. The treasurer said, be careful, don't do that, because he thought the roof was old, but really that's all I knew. Nowadays we have percent funded. Percent funded tells where you are with respect to ongoing deterioration. And I liken it to the overlay of world record pace that you see on the screen in a swimming race. Are they keeping up? Are they ahead, behind, falling behind? That's a good illustration of percent funded. So at this point in time, I know, and I want to communicate to you, that reserve cash doesn't tell you very much. You need to compare it to the value of reserve component deterioration at the association. So you could have at your association $9,000, like we had long ago, $90,000, $900,000, or $9 million, but you still need to compare that to the needs of the association in order to know how well the reserve fund is doing, if past contributions have kept pace with deterioration. So percent funded tells you something useful and informative. Now, if your association's percent fund is under 100%, like most associations, it means you have less reserve cash on hand than the value of reserve component deterioration. And let me make sure I emphasize that. What we're calculating here is the value of reserve component deterioration, not the total value of all the components. So less cash than reserve component deterioration is called being in a reserve deficit. If your reserve cash is equal to the value of reserve component deterioration, your reserves are 100% funded and your reserves are in balance. And if your reserve funds exceed the value of reserve component deterioration, your reserves are in a surplus position. And you can look at it kind of this way, like a thermometer. There's three general categories. Associations with reserves in the 0 to 30% funded range have a weak reserve fund. And that weak reserve fund means your association has a high risk of deferred maintenance or special assessments. No surprise, because your association has relatively little cash compared to the deterioration at the association. Moving on, the middle range, the yellow zone, is 30 to 70%. Most associations are in this middle range. These associations have a moderate risk of special assessments and deferred maintenance. Not high, just moderate. And associations in the green range, 70 to 130%, are in what we consider the strong or good range. And notice that the 100% point is right smack in the middle of this range. And here's a chart that tells you why this is important. Here's a risk of special assessment plotted against percent funded. Low percent funded on the left, strong percent funded on the right. This is data from the over 40,000 reserve studies that Paige told you about that we've prepared. It's a very clear relationship. The lower your percent funded, the more common special assessments will occur at your association. And this shows you why we've described it as three ranges. On the left side of the chart, clearly, the 0 to 30% range shows where special assessments are common. And then on the right side, the other extreme, associations in that green range, over 70%, special assessments are rare, almost zero. Those associations have enough reserve cash to perform the reserve projects on time without being forced to go into a special assessment situation. So let's see, if you're taking notes, a couple more things here. About 30% of associations are in the red 0 to 30% weak range. About 40% are in the middle yellow fair range, and about another 30%, the remaining 30%, are in that strong green range. And this is an important enough concept that it's worth another slide. Here's a special assessment risk shown a different way on a chart kind of like you see when going into a national park that speaks about fire danger. Low risk of reserve fund, the cash flow problems, which are special assessments and deferred maintenance, is found among associations with a percent funded in the 70 to 130% funded range. That's low risk. Next is the medium, 30 to 70% funded range. And then comes the high risk, 0 to 30% funded range. This is where you don't want to be. Associations in this range often experience disruptive special assessments, reserve cash flow problems, stressful board meetings, what else? Usually declining property values due to deferred maintenance and the reputation you get in the real estate community for special assessments. Okay, let's move from reserve fund strength and on to the third part of a reserve study, the question of how much an association should contribute. As a reminder, the simple answer is the association needs to contribute enough to offset that ongoing deterioration. If reserve contributions offset that ongoing deterioration, they'll have enough money to pay all those irregularly scheduled projects that occur out in the future. Now, because all associations are different, you know that, different size, different age, different materials used on the outside, different assets, maintenance, styles, owner expectations, reserve fund strength. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. However, This is the one part of the reserve study that requires action. The recommended funding plan is a call to action, and that means writing checks or making transfers to the reserve fund. Not thinking about it, not hoping you could do it, not knowing you should do it, but actually doing it and doing it regularly. Making scheduled reserve contributions makes the difference, makes a real difference from your pool looking like this, where my son used to live, where they don't have enough money to make the reserve contributions. They don't choose to have enough money to make reserve contributions, which means that they don't keep the pool clean or well maintained. And there's associations like this one where the owners all pay their fair share of deterioration on an ongoing basis, and it gives some nice, great results. Good for property values. The small cost of reserve contributions pays for itself very handsomely in higher home values. And just a reminder, you don't know how much is just right, like that dial that I showed earlier, without an updated reserve study that looks at the components and the current size and strength of the reserve fund and balances those two. Because guessing or wishful thinking won't get you to the right contribution rate. You need to actually have an updated reserve study and make those recommended contributions. Board members are running, again, a multi-million-dollar not-for-profit corporation, and your homeowners deserve that you as a board member make informed decisions about caring for their common area assets, the association's largest capital assets. Okay, so how much really is enough to contribute? If I was to simplify, for condominium owners to offset ongoing deterioration, often adequate reserve contributions are about the cost of a premium coffee per day each condominium owner. If you have more assets, that can be a little more towards the $5 per day range, but with less assets, again this is for condominium owners, it'll be more in the $2 or $3 per day range per owner. Another kind of figure of merit that we find pretty stable, even for high rises, planned developments, homeowners associations, pretty much all types, is that adequate reserve contributions are regularly in the range of 15 to 40% of the association's total budget. Many associations of all types find adequate reserve contributions are close to 25% of their total budget. Now, if you have your budget with you or after this session, you can do some quick calculations and see what fraction of your total budget is made up of reserve contributions. If you're under 25%, there's a good chance you're one of the associations that are pushing today's expenses off on future owners. And if you're less than 10% reserve contributions compared to total budget, it's highly likely you're headed right off a cliff for deferred maintenance, special assessments, and lower property values. Okay, looking at the time, and to summarize what I've covered today, I want to leave you with what we call the 4 reserve rules. Expenses always happen. The board's responsible to maintain the assets of the association, meaning that guessing is irresponsible. Delays usually get expensive, so it saves time and money to plan ahead, and the homeowners always get stuck paying the bills. So to save them money and maximize their property values, you need to prepare responsibly. Your reserve study and your reserve study professional together act as a good guide, able to tell you details about your journey to the future, making sure that you're prepared with a good understanding of your starting point and knowing how to guide you to your destination safely and efficiently. They've been there before. They know how to guide you there. They know what the issues are. They're a big help. The end result of getting a reserve study and using it, and remember those are 2 very different things, for budget planning and communicating to your owners, is the projects get done in a timely manner, with each owner paying their fair share along the way. The end result of that, the association looks great, property values are maximized. Now this doesn't guarantee happiness, but fiscally responsible behavior isn't expensive, and it leads to a peaceful association. And that's a pretty quick outline of reserve study basics. There's so much more I could have talked about. Reserve component selection, calculating reserve fund strength, different funding objectives, strategies, calculation methods, consequences of underfunding, strategies for communicating reserve study results to your members, strategies for raising contributions, reserve studies and business judgment rule, liability exposure, all those things that we just don't have time for today. But that's why we have a learning center on our website, www.reservestudy.com. You can go there and get answers to so many reserve study questions, see some other webinars, find some other documents that will all be very helpful. And if you find your association in need of an updated reserve study, by all means, click on our Request a Proposal link. And if you heard about this webinar from someone else, go to our website and click on the link to sign up for our email list. People on our list get time-saving reserve study tips, announcements about upcoming webinars, reserve study discount notices periodically, and news in general that will help their association. And that wraps up the prepared portion of today's webinar, and we'll transition to the brief Q&A time. And just to remember, for those who've submitted questions in advance, I'll answer all the written questions that we don't have time to answer online in that outline that Paige mentioned that we're going to provide to all who complete the end of session survey. So at this time, I'll turn the microphone over to Paige, who will serve as our MC. Paige?
Thank you, Robert. As I mentioned earlier, you can ask a question by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. All right, Robert, the first question is from Cindy. Is exclusive use common area included in the common area that you mentioned?
Exclusive use common area, my understanding is that it's common area that only a limited number or one owner has the right to access. So it's still common area, it's still the maintenance responsibility of the association. It just means that not everyone goes on it. It's often thought of like a balcony. It's exclusive use common area, so the association maintains it, but strangers, other unit owners can't have a party on your balcony. So it's still common area, and it still should appear in a reserve study.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Lisa. So it's okay to be overfunded? Can you just explain that a little more for Lisa, please?
Good question. It's ideal to have a reserve study that's in balance, a reserve fund in balance. There's many associations, most associations are underfunded, and they're in the process of trying to become to increase their reserve fund strength and become more prepared for future expenses. There's a few associations that are overfunded. That's not a good place to be. Those associations are gradually trying to slightly underfund their reserves and get down to the 100% level. So it's a continual process, whether you're coming up from underneath or relaxing from above, associations trying to reach that 100% fully funded level.
Okay, continuing on that, question is from Joe. Assessment risk. If you're at 100% funded, you're ready to pay for the next, say, 20 years, which is not realistic. Why would you do that?
Well, let me clarify. When you're 100% funded, it just means that you're on pace. If you have let's say a $10,000 pool project that happens every 10 years, and the pool project, the pool's 5 years old, it's only halfway aged. If it's a $10,000 project, you should only have $5,000 on hand. So if you have $5,000 in reserves, you're 100% funded. You're not set, you're just on pace. And so you don't sit back on your hands and wait. It just shows that you're ready. You're on pace to be ready. So at that point in time, it's the right thing. Keep up the contributions. Percent funded is all about, at this point in time, can you call your reserves strong, fair, or weak? So it's not a matter of being set. It's a matter of being on pace at this point in time.
Okay, great. Next question is, how are replacement costs determined?
Good question. Replacement costs are generally determined in one of three different manners. We at Association Reserves are fortunate to have clients all across the country, relatively high density, and so our primary way of establishing a replacement cost estimate is by comparing to our existing benchmark information from actual projects done among our client associations. So if one client association just had their roof done, we are able to use that as a benchmark, as an actual cost for other similar associations in the area. So benchmarking from actual projects. Another very effective way to get costs is communicating with the association's vendors. They often are intimately familiar with the association, and it's in their best interest that they communicate effectively with us. For instance, telling us that a repaint project due to the trees and the hillside location might be, let's say, a $100,000 project when otherwise you might think it was a $60,000 project. We can help the association get ready for that particularly and unique expensive project by having gained insights from the association's vendor. And the third way of getting anticipated expenses is national standard construction estimating guidebooks. They're often zip code specific, and so you can get in the right range. But just like that painting estimate, it is good to have someone with a feet on the ground, a baseline of experience that can see exactly what's going on and make the appropriate adjustments. So those are the typical 3 ways cost estimates are made.
Okay, thank you. Next question. For street replacement, should reserves be set aside during the first years or only when the 30-year remaining life is attained? Shouldn't early homeowners be paying their fair share for using the streets?
I tend to agree with you. Everyone should pay their fair share of the ongoing cost of deterioration. Let's go with your premise that rebuilding the streets or resurfacing the streets needs to happen at the 30-year point in time. It'd be great if we had all 30 years of homeowners who use those streets over 30 years paying the 1/30th each year cost of that resurfacing project, so everyone pays their fair share. That's a great way to illustrate that if everyone pays their fair share a long time, then when you get to the 30th year, the money's set aside, it's there, and you get the streets done. So it is fairest and most effective that everyone who's using the asset pay their fair share of the ongoing cost of deterioration.
Okay, great. Next question. Can the reserve study include recommended property insurance companies and or recommended coverage amount?
Interesting. I went through the 4-part test that defines appropriate components. And so what we're looking for is a list of projects that fits that 4-part test. So insurance companies and insurance coverage isn't really in the realm of reserve studies. And besides, insurance values, the kind of numbers they're looking for, are for a different type of issue. Those are values for rebuilding, not values for repainting or resurfacing or re-roofing, things like that. So different numbers, different field, kind of a different animal. You should speak to your insurance professional about that.
Okay, great. We have time for one last question, and that is, what do you recommend for associations that are underfunded?
Great. There's so many associations that are underfunded, and we have a real simple recommendation, and that's what we call the $10 solution. Most associations are somewhere between, let me say it the simplest way. The $10 solution is simply this. Next year, raise your dues $10. Have those $10 go per month to reserves. So if your current homeowner assessments are $250 a month, raise them to $260 and have that extra $10 be added to the reserve contributions. Do that for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and that's really all it takes. Most associations aren't that far behind, and that another $20 per month per owner to $50 per month per owner is really all it takes to make the difference from being inadequately funded to appropriately funding their reserves, covering that ongoing cost of deterioration. So it's typically a 2, 3, 4, 5-year process, $10 increases per year. If it would be very rare that an association couldn't do that.
Okay, thank you, Robert. That concludes our webinar. If anyone is interested in a recorded version of this or any other webinar, you can search for them on YouTube or on the Association Reserves webinars page. If you enjoyed today's session and would like to receive the Association Reserves newsletter or announcements of future webinars, please visit www.reservestudy.com and click the icon to sign up for the newsletter. As you exit this webinar, a survey will display. If you could help us out by completing the survey, we'll be happy to email you an outline of the webinar. As Robert mentioned before, any unanswered questions will be answered in this outline. I want to thank you all for attending. If you have any questions or if there's any way we can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you again. Goodbye.